Hello, welcome back. It's Marjorie from the Red Resistance Podcast. And I am here to talk about episode 5, Janine, from season 6 of The Handmaid's Tale. We are halfway through. I don't have a ton of overall thoughts. Actually, let's save any overall thoughts for in the end of this episode. Because there's a lot of little nods to Janine in little ways through this episode, but not in ways in which I could make coherent as overall statements at this point. So maybe once we get through all of these scenes, I'll have a better, more coherent way of seeing what I think is there. But just as a springboard, what I was really enjoying in this episode was all of these characters throughout the episode kind of dealing with what we've seen Janine deal with through the series. Janine's arc for the first half of the series had really been kind of in this delusionment that was based in survival and based in all of the things that Lydia had told her were the means to survival. So she kind of got sucked into and brainwashed within this regime. Understandably so. We saw her get her eye plucked out, and that's going to make you fall into line really quickly. And we see that with Janine. And then through the second half of the series, from 3-ish into 4 and 5, and now what we're seeing in 6 so far, is really a different Janine. We've seen a lot of growth. And so I think that in little ways throughout this episode, there are characters that are having that same arc in smaller, more singular episode type ways. And with that halfway point in Janine's arc kind of being halfway through the series and her shift in perspective from the second half being remarkably different from the first half, I thought it was really, really cool in this episode. Almost exactly halfway through is the part of the scene at Jezebel's where Larry is looking through the hole in the wall. Just within the episode, that's a huge turning point for Larry. His perspective has changed, I'm assuming, for the rest of the series at this point. He seemed to have a false sense of security at the beginning of the episode, and then he realized what a big misstep he had made. But that vantage point of looking through a hole in a wall is exactly Janine's vantage point through this entire series. I thought it was so cool that in an episode called Janine, exactly halfway through, you've got Larry looking through a hole in the wall, and everything about that vantage point changes his perspective. If anything, her getting her eye plucked out really forced her into falling in line very quickly in her time in Gilead. But eventually, through all of the things that she had seen, she's really learned the truth about the hypocrisy of living in this world. It really reminds me of that Tuella line that he says to Serena in season 4 when he goes back with her to Gilead for Fred's funeral. And he says, it's kind of strange being here after studying it for so many years. And she says, is it different than you expected? And he says, not really. It's surface level beauty papered over a stunning amount of hypocrisy. And I think through everything that Janine has seen, that has really been hammered home to her. And what she knows now at this point in the series, like at season 4, I think she says to Lydia when she's recaptured and brought back to the Red Center, she's having a conversation with Lydia, and she says, I know what's going to happen to me and continue to happen to me until I die. So she's no longer believing that, like, I'm your special girl meant for special things, and, you know, if I just do what I'm told, I'll have this nice life. Like, she knows what her life is going to be like living in Gilead. And then in that last episode, when she's having that conversation with Lydia, and Lydia's like, well, I was told, and Janine's like, well, they lied to you. Janine understands the pretense now. And we're seeing all of these other characters kind of come to that same realization on their own journeys. So let's just get into the episode and we will see where it takes us from there. Now, it starts out with 3 really quick shots that I kind of went down a little bit of a rabbit hole with. At first, they have the seeds flying through the air as the song starts to play. And we're at the Mayday operation, which I had not realized that they were at like a ski lodge, but it looks like that's exactly where they are. That's what that giant compound is. It's not one huge abandoned mansion, which is really what I was thinking. It is a ski lodge. So they have the seeds spreading through the air, and at first I was like, oh, like seeds of resistance. Okay, this is this big Mayday operation that's about to take place, and it has phases, and this is phase 1. And so I like the imagery just for that. It also reminded me of the flashback scene of Holly taking June to the Take Back the Night at the park. And I think in the book, her mother said they were going to feed the ducks, and it wasn't until she got there that she realized that it was something different. So I really like that imagery for a couple reasons in these first couple shots, because so you have the shot of the seeds through the air, then there's a shot of the ski lift abandoned and run down, and then there's a shot of June in her Martha clothing, and we know she's an undercover Mayday operative about to go back into Gilead. And I really just like that imagery of thinking about June as this child of Holly going to the Take Back the Night event, then all of this time later to see her dressed as this undercover Mayday operative going back in to take back her country, which should be obviously really bittersweet, more bitter than sweet. Kind of that sentiment that Holly had said earlier of like, everything I lost. And so to think that this was this fight that she was fighting, and yet her daughter had to experience Gilead in the way that she did. But it's those experiences that have shaped her and trained her to be able to go back into the situation with the best chance of being effective. So the montage continues of everyone at Mayday getting ready for this operation. And June makes eye contact with Moira, and she smiles, and she gives her this really like nice, genuine, happy to see you smile. And Moira just glares back at her and turns her back and walks away. And I'm like, oof. I guess that's where they stand at the beginning of this episode. So June kind of rolls her eyes and continues on. There's also a shot of her seeing Luke, and I really love the way that he looks at her, because he just looks so in love and like happy that they're fighting together. Like he looks like he's happy to be enacting his plan, and to have June by his side is exactly what he wants, and he's happy that she's there. But all I could think of is that quote from, I think it's season 1, in the flashback where they're meeting, and he says that he likes this one picture of her because she looks invincible. And that's all I could think of as she's walking through Mayday and he's looking back over at her, is that she looks invincible. So they're loading up the van, and June goes to load herself into the compartment, and she has one final kiss with Luke. And all I could think of was his quote about 2 lunatics going back into Gilead, because that's exactly what this is. So then Luke closes her into the hidden compartment in the back of the van. And every time that I see this imagery, I go back to that quote that she had about, "I will not be the girl in the box." And I'm like, oh, this bitch is in that box again. And at the end of this episode, she's going to pop out of that box like a little Jack in the Box. A June in the box. That's terrifying. And the scene ends with an aerial shot of the van coming to a fork in the road, and it's like they could go back to safety or they could go into Gilead. And we know where they're going in this episode. And this episode takes place over the course of one day. And so we're starting out in the morning in Mayday, and in the next scene we head over to Gilead with Nick and Wharton, and it is still morning. And Wharton is popping in on Nick as he gets ready for his day, and he's asking if he's got a busy day. And Nick says, yeah, 26 families have been relocated into New Bethlehem, and there's going to be more on the way. So New Bethlehem is a success at this point. And Wharton is quick to point out that there are a lot of people that have been promised safety, and Nick's not doing such a great job on the safety front here. And Nick's like, don't worry, I'm way ahead of you. I've already opened an investigation. And Wharton says, well, we need to hold these people accountable. And so we get updated on the status of these 2 guardians that he shot. One is dead and one is in a coma and not doing well. And Wharton jumps in there and says, actually, he's making a recovery. And it kind of feels like Wharton is here just to get a read on Nick with this news. Like, he wanted to be the one to give him the news. I think he's definitely holding his feet to the fire a little bit of, you need to do a better job. But I think his underlying motive here is that he's already suspicious of Nick because he's missing in action when these things are happening. And I feel like he just wants to get a read on Nick as he delivers this news to him. And Nick recovers quickly, but there is like a beat where he takes that information in, and it kind of looks like his face is saying, oh shit. But he does recover quickly, and he says, I pray for his recovery. Then we cut to Lydia and Serena having breakfast at Serena's place in New Bethlehem. And I love this scene so much because these 2 are going to work together. They definitely are trying to strategize through the scene. And they just annoy each other so much. There's so much animosity and irritation just bubbling through this entire scene. And Serena basically calls her stupid at least twice. It definitely reminds me of the episode where Lydia moves in to the Waterfords to help with June and the late term pregnancy and Serena and kind of ease that entire situation. And Serena is irritated with Lydia's presence through the entire episode, but there's this real underlying like animosity and jealousy that Lydia gets to write and gets to work, and she gets to have this existence in this women's space that is unique, and she's an exception to the rule. And Serena had always thought that she'd be an exception to the rule, and she wasn't. And I feel like there was a lot of envy in that scene and in that situation. And so now to see Serena really having to spell out this strategy for Lydia, like this just isn't Lydia's wheelhouse, apparently, like strategizing and branding and politicking. I really thought Lydia would be better at this in this scene, and Serena has the upper hand the entire way, and she pretty much just tells her, like, are you stupid? You can just feel that frustration through the scene of Serena being like, why are you the one in charge of things? You cannot be this slow to figure this stuff out. But it starts out with Serena kind of coming in hot, and there might be more to the conversation that we didn't see, but she just starts with, and what did you imagine would happen to the handmaids? And Lydia responds with, I didn't imagine, I was promised that they would become respected members of society. And Serena laughs at her and she says, and you believed it? Now, this is the third time that we've had people question Lydia's ability to see reality past all of the Gilead pretense. And she just really doesn't see it. Again, this is that time that she believed. It's now. It has to be now, because she's just not seeing anything other than exactly the ideology and ideals that Gilead puts forth as truth, instead of more of what Tuella was saying of surface level on top of a lot of hypocrisy. And Lydia is really slow to figuring out what all this hypocrisy is about. Like at the end of season 5, when Lydia was trying to have the commanders come to the Red Center to perform the ceremony instead of having the handmaids live at the house, and Larry was like, well, that would defeat the purpose of the handmaids, then they wouldn't have their little plaything in their home. And Lydia's really offended by this, and Larry's like, you had to know, didn't you? You knew, right? Like, you knew? And she's like, I did not know. And then she has that conversation with Janine, and Janine's like, well, they lied to you. So to hear Serena calling her out on it again at this point, when she's already past the point of realization, she gets very frustrated by it, and she flips it around on Serena, and she's like, you believed a lot of things before your recent travels. What did you think happened to the handmaids? And at least Serena has the decency to look a little ashamed when she admits that she didn't really think about it, but she jumps right back into that defensiveness that we've heard from her before, and a lot of the same reasons that we've kind of used to not justify but explain Serena's actions in the past within this system that she's been forced to live in, and yet also pushed and brought forth. And Serena gives her excuses of, I was hurting and I really wanted a baby. In other words, I was selfish and lacked empathy. And Lydia continues, my handmaid suffered greatly in your home. I mean, we know that the first Fred killed herself, and we know all about everything that happened with June. So Lydia is definitely holding the mirror up to Serena's face at this point. And the best thing she can do in response is hold that mirror up to Lydia and say, as in yours. And they agree that they're kind of in an impasse and that this is stupid. They're here to discuss a solution in reforming and changing the system, and instead they're hashing out who is worse amongst the system. And at least they're smart enough to realize, like, this is a stupid conversation, and they both sit down, which kind of takes the heat out of both of them for the rest of this conversation. So Lydia says something like, this is foolish, and Serena agrees, but takes it as a door to shift the conversation into what she's there to do. Again, as Serena's just better at this entire conversation than Lydia is, she responds to Lydia with, one could say any attempt to change Gilead is foolish, but I opened a fertility center in Canada and it's thriving. And Lydia says, and that's relevant, how? And Serena just gives her this look like this fucking bitch. And I just love these two together. They're so funny. And Lydia is just so thick in this conversation. So Serena pauses for a second, composes herself, and continues. But she has a little disdain in her voice as she says, we could open a new fertility center in New Bethlehem. And Lydia goes, can we stay focused on the handmaids, please? And Serena's starting to get more exasperated. And she says, yes, Aunt Lydia, the handmaid's brand is fertility. And Lydia's so outraged and offended by this. And Serena all but calls her stupid when she says, let me put it in plain and simple words for you. The handmaids could serve as attendants in the new fertility center. And Lydia lets it wash over her for a moment as she finally catches up with what Serena's been telling her. And she goes, that's not a brand, that's a divine calling. And I love how they just have two wildly different words for the exact same thing. Brand, divine calling, either way, their goal is the same. But then the flower arrangement arrives and Serena looks a little taken aback and a little flustered, like in a good way, as she looks at it, but she doesn't go to it. And Lydia encourages her to go open it up. And that made me laugh because obviously Lydia wants to know exactly who that's from. And as soon as she finds out, she does have an opinion and a nudge in the right direction, or in a direction. I don't know if it's the right direction. So she opens the letter and she says that Wharton wants to see her this evening before he escorts Rose to DC this evening. And it's not until right now that I'm saying that out loud that I'm like, why is Rose going to DC? I feel like if she was escorting him, that's how he would say that. He says, I'm going to escort Rose to DC. Do we know why Rose would go back to DC and not stay in New Bethlehem with Nick while she's pregnant? Maybe for the pregnancy. Maybe her doctors are in DC. Am I supposed to know why she's going to DC? All right, stay tuned. Let's just put that on a back burner. Rose is in DC, ? So then Lydia jumps back into action, and Lydia is starting to look a little more like herself in the scene for the first time. That divine calling for the handmaids has really put a perk in her step, and she's gaining a little momentum and a little fire in this conversation and seeing a door open with these flowers arriving. So she wants more information, and she says to Serena, another dance, dare I say? And I feel like that's a little bit Lydia doublespeak, not in any kind of crazy way, but she's referring to their like not illicit, but not illicit dance in the streets of New Bethlehem that she just like popped in on. But it also is like implying this marriage that by the end of this episode, we're going to see Serena saying yes to. So, like another dance, another shot at marriage. And Serena puts the brakes on it really quickly and she says, let's not get any ideas. And Lydia jumps in there and says, hey, he is politically advantageous to marry. And Lydia pulls out that Pride and Prejudice quote and Serena says, that's the ultimate example of irony. And Lydia responds with, you want to know what's not ironic? A healthy womb. So Lydia is pushing Serena to get married because she needs to have more babies. And we do know that Lydia is all about those babies. So that hasn't changed. And having an alliance with Wharton, who's obviously into Serena, would be advantageous for their fertility center plan. But I feel like Serena was really surprised by the U-turn of that conversation. She was really focused on pushing her fertility center and the role in which the handmaids can play in it. And then these flowers showed up and she didn't really want Lydia in her business, and then she kind of tries to brush her off when she starts talking about marriage, and then she hits her with the healthy womb. If that isn't irony coming back to slap Serena in the face. She forgot all about embracing her biological destiny. It was kind of crazy to see Serena have that realization that she still has this role and this duty, and I don't think she was really thinking have more babies at this point. Like, she was there to enact her change and reform in New Bethlehem, and it looks like she's really thriving and enjoying that role. And she'll say it to Wharton later at the end of this episode, like, she has a plan, she has things she wants to do, she's not trying to get married and be a wife. And the second part of that statement is, I guess, have more babies. So for Lydia to remind her of that when Serena had been like 5 steps ahead of Lydia in this conversation the entire time, and then Lydia just slapped her with, "You need to have babies. You have a healthy womb and that can't be wasted." Then we cut to June and Moira arriving at Jezebel's, and they get a rundown of what the plan is. They need to get eyes on the penthouse, they need to have their masks on, they need to warn their friend and get out in 2 hours. As they're walking through the halls of Jezebel's trying to get to Janine, all I could think of was how good of a team June and Moira are going to make going in for this little mini operation, because you have Moira, who has the lay of the land of Jezebel's and knows how it works there, or did at one point know how it worked when she was there. But she knows the lay of the land a little bit better than June does. And then you've got June, who's just been in these circumstances in which she's had to operate in these undercover Mayday-esque type roles and keep her cool about her. So the two of them going in together got me very excited. So as soon as that plan is getting rattled off, I'm like, oh, that's not going to go well, because June just said 10 times in that last episode that these plans never go the way you expect them to. So I'm like just trying to figure out where that plan's going to go wrong. And then they start walking into Jezebel's and the music's playing, and I'm like, they're fine. It's June, it's Moira, this plan's going to go fine. So June finds out that Janine is in the penthouse because the girl name drops Charlotte when she's talking about the picture that's hanging on the mirror. I really like the line of her saying that she thinks her kid's the next Rembrandt, because it's just such a typical parenting thing to think that something very kind of mundane and average that your child has done is extraordinary. And it was nice to see that even in this extraordinary context, where her parenting is limited to so few engagements and in such an extraordinary circumstance, to see that some universal things still come through was kind of cute. Then they find out that the plan has gone askew because there are commanders coming tonight, and they weren't expecting there to be commanders tonight. So Moira and June are discussing this change of plans when an aunt interrupts and tells them to get back to work. And June, like she said she would be, is able to think quickly in this situation, and she says, "We were discussing going up and getting it ready for the commanders." And when they get to the penthouse, there's already a guardian there, and Moira tells him that they were sent, and he allows it and lets them in. And I like that initially when the aunt approached them, Moira kind of fell right back into what she would normally do in that situation, which is just to apologize and fall in line. And it was June that had to maneuver to get the direction to go to the penthouse the way she wanted. So I felt like that was a quick change for Moira. By the time they get up to that penthouse, at least this time, she's ready to explain herself and push back and maneuver a little bit with the guardian, although she didn't have to really think on her feet other than to say that we're just here to clean the room before the commanders get there, which is exactly what they were just sent to do. But it was nice that she was the one that was able to step up in the situation and take that first initiative to get them past that door. It's like she's getting her feet under her quickly, the same way that June had to when she would be put in these interactions, and just had to think on the fly and learn on the go. And as they enter the penthouse, June has that anxious look on her face and mannerisms in her movement that Rita had, because she knows that this huge reunion is impending, but she doesn't know when and where it's going to happen. So she keeps looking over her shoulder. It just reminded me of that same anxiety-fueled feeling of anticipation. And then you hear Janine singing, and June recognizes her voice before she sees her. And you can see the joy and relief in June's face as she recognizes that that's Janine, and she turns and she sees her and she's dancing, and she's still the same Janine that June last saw her at this point. She's singing even in Jezebel. She's the flowers in the colonies girl. And June looks back at Moira, and there's this like excitedness in the air. But then they cut back to Janine, and she's continuing to sing and dance, and she's kind of in the moment. And then you watch as her eyes meet June's. And she recognizes her right away, but I was expecting there to be more joy, the same way you had just seen it in June's face, and it wasn't there. There was like apprehension. She goes over to her, and her first words are, "You're Martha's now." And I hadn't considered that that's exactly how it's going to look to Janine. So, of course, she's going to think that June's been recaptured. She knows that June has been on the run from Gilead since arriving in Canada. So, to see her turn up in a Martha's uniform, her first instinct is, oh shit, you're back. And that's bad news, as opposed to, oh shit, you're here to spring me. And it's kind of worth noting that we've seen a lot of these reunions where these women are in a situation in which they recognize each other and they haven't seen each other in a long time and there's a lot of love there, but it's not joyous because one of them is being brought back to a situation that they were trying to escape. Like, we see it with June and Emily a couple times, and we see it with Emily and Janine when Janine turns up at the colonies, and then a couple times with Moira and June when June initially turns up at the Red Center, but then when they see each other at Jezebel's. Although that one's a little bit happier because June at that point thought that Moira was dead, but there wasn't as much joy on Moira's face. She seemed more upset that June had turned up at Jezebel's. So it's just interesting that in this world, these reunions that should be filled with joy are often tinged with a lot of bittersweet implications. But June only has a minute to explain what they're there for before the commanders show up. And Janine has to put on an act and play a role that June hasn't seen her play yet. And Janine has come a long way and grown a lot since June has last seen her. And this is the first sign that Janine is different when these commanders come in. First off, Janine has to think really quick of where they can meet clandestinely. And she gives June that information, and then she snaps into a different person, and she goes and plays this role of Kitty that she needs to with Belle. And June looks over her shoulder, and it could just be that she's looking at Belle and trying to get eyes on him because they do have a list of all the commanders that are targets. It's entirely possible that she just wants to put a face to Belle in real life and see if their intel is correct, because Belle was name dropped downstairs with the other Jezebel. So it's possible that that's all that June was looking at when she looked over her shoulder, but I feel like she was looking over at Janine with a little bit of a sense of astonishment. It's almost like she can sense the change in maturity and resistance that Janine has developed over June's time away from her. And then Belle continues to be the total creep that we know he is. So he spills the champagne and he's just trying to play this game with this Martha of like, it's just a power trip. He can tell her what to do. He can make a game out of it. And he's on a stage with all of his buddies. So there's even more of this, like, I'm going to be an asshole because I have an audience air to him. It very much reminded me of that scene in Useful with Larry when he calls June in to make her serve all these commanders. And this is just one, like, more elevated, grosser version of that. Except for that Larry is there. And when he finally steps in, the shot is really cool because June can't see him, but we can see June's face, and we know the second he speaks that she knows that it's him. It's very similar to the first time she's in his home as his handmaid, and she doesn't know it's his home, and he comes up behind her, and he starts talking, and you can see that flicker of recognition in her eye then. And this time, like, obviously she knows that it's Larry. And she was not expecting to see him at Jezebel's. But he steps in and reprieves her and kind of puts Calhoun in his place in, like, a gentle way at first. Like, he's not too aggressive as he's like, all right. And he grabs June by the shoulders and he, like, turns her to leave the room. And it's like he can sense her presence as she walks away from him. And he's only seen the back of her, but he puts his arms on her shoulders, and it's like, just that is enough familiarity as she moves away from him for him to know, or at least to be triggered into thinking about June. And as he turns and looks over his shoulder, he's definitely quizzical about it. But June looks over her shoulder too, and I'm like, if the goal here is to not have Larry recognize you, what are you doing looking over your shoulder like that? Look forward. He never sees her face, and then she's gone. It's like a blink and she's out the room. And he's standing there just kind of puzzled, like he just saw a ghost. Then we cut to Nick at the hospital checking in on the Guardian, and he's talking to his mother, and she's giving him an update of he's woken up a couple times, but he hasn't said anything. He's just mumbling. And you can see Nick going back and forth between the good news and the bad news of doctor said he wouldn't wake up, yay, but he is awake, but he's only mumbling. And he's got to play both sides of the fence like we always see Nick having to do. And she talks about how her son Toby really looked up to all the men in his unit, men like Nick, who are brave and honorable. And she wants him to promise that he's going to find out who did this to her son. And he tells her that he'll stay and she can go home and get some rest. And she says, yeah, I got to go see my other son. And she leaves and she thanks him. And as soon as she leaves, Toby starts to wake up. And Nick has to assess the situation. He went there looking for any reason to not have to kill this guy and finish the job. But those hopes get shattered the second that Toby wakes up, and you can hear his heart race. He knows exactly who Nick is. And so Nick says, do you remember me? And he waits for a second as his heart's racing away, and he says, dog, I want my dog. And he does his best. Like, I'll give that kid credit. He really tried to act like he did not know who Nick was, and he understood that he should not know who Nick is, and he does not want to tell this guy standing in his hospital room that, yeah, I remember you. You shot me in the face. Or, I don't know, actually, I don't know where he shot. I really just assumed he must have been shot in the head because, I don't know, Nick was 2 feet away from him. I feel like if you're gonna shoot him, you might as well make sure he's dead. And if you shot him anywhere else, it's not very sure he's dead as you're fleeing the scene. So I don't know. I guess just in my mind, I always assumed he'd have some kind of head wound, but I didn't see one in the hospital bed. So, and then Nick kind of nods like he's accepted that this is good enough for him as proof that this kid doesn't remember him and he can carry on. And it's like Nick wants so badly for that answer to be enough. And he walks out of the room, which was making me laugh because it's like he came here, got the confirmation he needed, and now he's going to bounce. So much for telling the mother that he was going to sit with him for a little bit. Like, he didn't even last 30 seconds. But he does not actually leave. He walks through the door, stops, shakes his head, and walks back in. And it's like he really wanted to walk away from this without having such calculated blood on his hands, and he can't. He didn't have another choice at this point, but that doesn't mean this didn't really weigh on him. And I keep going back to that line that Nick said to Tuello earlier in the season about how many more bodies are going to pile up on the fire. And we have Nick playing this double agent right now, but his role with the Americans is not looking great because he doesn't seem to have a lot of faith in these Mayday operations to begin with. That was his point to Tuello in that conversation, was give up? Like, when are you gonna just accept defeat? Gilead just kind of has the Americans outnumbered, out-resourced, and Nick doesn't see what the point of this Mayday fight is. Like, he just doesn't seem to be behind it ideologically. His only motives are to ensure June's safety. So he kills this kid, or he kills that guy and attempts to kill this kid just so he can keep June safe. Now he has to go finish the job, which is a lot less reactive and a lot more calculated. I mean, he has to go back and lock the door. He has to go seek out this kid at the hospital. He has to tell the mother to go, and then her son's just gonna drop dead. And Wharton's like watching over him. Like, none of this feels like very good choices, but at the same time, what other choice does he have? And it's all for what? Just so he can keep June safe. But if the Americans in Mayday would just go away and June would just go to Alaska, then it feels like he could at least live with his choices. This seems to be weighing on his conscience, but getting out of Gilead isn't even why he worked with the Americans anyway. It was just to keep June safe. It was not to be reunited with her. So now he's got one more body on the fire, and theoretically he's covering his tracks, but if Wharton was suspicious of him prior to this morning, he's definitely going to be more suspicious now. Then we cut back to Larry at Jezebel's. It looks like he's there to celebrate with these other commanders the success of New Bethlehem, and more or less just kind of trying to remain in true accord still. I guess this is this set of commanders' version of golfing. We see it with Wharton telling Nick that he's gonna meet with Larry on the back nine and try to win favor for Nick with him there. And it's like with these commanders, he has to go to Jezebel's if he wants to maneuver his plans. He's there, he's celebrating, And he says he wants to thank them for their support. I think it's Reynolds jumps in there and he says it's more like permission than support. I'm like, oh geez. And I feel like that's the first sign that Larry needs to read this room a little better. But he continues on at that point, thinking that his success for this program speaks for itself. And he tries pushing for expansion at several other locations, the same way that he was pushing with Wharton. So Larry has his plan and his points, and he's sticking to them. He's just politicking in different ways with different groups. So with these commanders who are largely effective for approving New Bethlehem, more so than Wharton is, who's from DC and kind of just here and important, but not making these local decisions, is, I guess, the take on it. Larry continues to persuade them about the success of his program, saying that nothing has done more to improve foreign relations. And he gets Reynolds and Calhoun's support, and they say, like, why don't you send over those sites and we'll take a look at it. So it's like, win for Larry. But meanwhile, in the background, you've got Janine working the room in a way in which I wish June was there to see her, because she's just going to get what she needs to done. And she's as smart as she could possibly be about it. Also, Calhoun is just so fucking gross. Like, he's so extra gross. And Jezebel's is extra gross. And it's like through these last couple episodes and with Belle just being so awful, it's like, God, I want this Mayday plan to work so bad, because I just need to see this guy get murdered in a very satisfying way. Like in a Fred type satisfying way. Like, I want to think about it. I want to go back and watch that scene with glee, because I've had to watch these scenes so many times for this podcast, and I'm sick of this guy's face, and I'm sick of everything that comes out of his mouth. He's so gross. So Janine's in the background interacting with him, and you can tell, like, it's already been said several times, he really likes her. He wants Janine. This is his girl. And it's ironic because he tells Calhoun as soon as they come in, like, oh, don't be claiming too early, it's embarrassing. Meanwhile, everyone knows that Belle has long ago claimed Janine. Janine wants to get alone with Larry so that she can go meet with June, so she knows that that's the move she's got to make, and she plays it a little risky by appearing to hit on Larry, and that's going to send Belle into a tizzy, because now he's embarrassed and rejected. And we can't reject someone like him. So Larry and Belle kind of have this like power battle back and forth over Janine. And the other commanders end up kind of siding with Larry and saying, oh, come on, Belle, let him have her. He's obviously developed a little crush. But Larry can't just leave and take that win for what it is, because Belle says something stupid about, leave the rough stuff for me. I want her back good as new. And Larry just, I think he's riding a little high from the fact that he just got the commanders to agree to looking at his plan for expansion, and he got them to agree to let him take Janine out of Belle's grip. So he says, you're a pig, Belle. Belle goes, fuck you, Lawrence, and Larry just starts to lay into him. He basically just tells him he offers nothing, and he has no friends. Why are you even here? Your brains, your talent, your impeccable charm. And Belle looks to the group for some kind of backing, and he's already lost it a couple times. And he says, can you believe this guy? And Larry doesn't even wait for the group to pick a side. He says, no one here even likes you. No one. And no one respects you. And he exits the room with Janine. And it feels in that moment like such a mic drop moment. On the rewatch, it's like, God, tread carefully. This guy's dangerous. But in the moment, I'm like, yeah, fuck you, Belle. So he goes into the room alone with Janine, and he tries to apologize for the commanders, and he says, they're disgusting, sorry. And she goes, you're not a good guy, only compared to them. And he goes, thank you. A, Larry's so used to this, and B, he knows. He knows he's not a good guy. He's not doing this for some kind of public redemption. He's doing this for a very personal redemption for himself. Like, he needs to fix what he knows he set wrong. He's not in it for more power. He's not in it for the head pats or the bleeding heart recognition. He's in it to make actual large-scale differences. We've seen him affect people's lives within this regime, Emily, June, now Janine, and within his household. But for Larry to feel like there's any redemption for himself personally, he's going to have to make a large-scale change to the system that he designed. And Janine's in a rush when she's in there. She doesn't want to stay long. We know that she's in a rush to go get a proper reunion with June and to go get more information about this Mayday operation that's coming back next week. Like, she's got bigger things going on than hanging out in this room with Larry. But as she's walking out, she says, you should see this. Despite just saying that he's not a good guy, she did make a distinction that he is slightly better than the rest of the men in that room. The implication as she shows him is that she recognizes that he's different enough from them that she can at least trust him. She removes the picture on the wall and she slides the little cover over the hole, and she tells him that this is how the girls see who they're dealing with. And she says to him, you can't let them win, before she leaves. And that's kind of like the cool growth that we've seen with Janine that I'm excited for June to see. This ability to, like, she's not naive to the situation. Like, there's a change there with her. She sees the reality of the situation for what it is. Like, think back to her relationship with Putnam, and she believed everything that he told her, and he was awful. And she's been in this world long enough and had enough experiences now to know that Larry is trustworthy, but just because he's trustworthy and can be useful to her doesn't mean that he is one of the good guys. So Janine leaves and we get the shot of Larry looking through the hole. And it's just so cool because we get to see him getting this one-eyed vantage point. Just the fact that this viewpoint even exists is a gift from Janine. But because she only has one eye, it's the first time we see Janine is her getting her eye plucked out. And it makes her so recognizable through this entire series. It's just such a specific, discernible trait of Janine's. And so to see Larry looking through this wall with this one-eyed perspective and then finding out all of the information that he's finding out was really cool. Knowing that Janine has come so far with her own perspective of her situation and of Gilead as a whole, it was really cool to see Larry, who really thought he had everyone's number and understood this world in which he had to operate, and he's realizing that it was a facade for him too, and that he was fooled, and he was fooled again. He was already fooled once, and he's already trying to make amends for that. And now to find out that he's been fooled again, like, I feel like this is going to hit him really hard. We haven't seen enough of the fallout in this episode of what this is going to do to his psyche, but I feel like this is really going to knock him down a peg in terms of his confidence. Like, he left that room thinking he had really made progress. And to find out that these commanders were never taking his plan seriously, it was never going to be this, like, beacon of reform that he thought it was. It's a trap to repopulate this country so that they can then shut it all down and return to traditional values. And then the revelations aren't even done. They continue. And you've got this really wounded Bell after that last interaction, and he's got friends in the room. By the end of this conversation, he's convinced them that Larry's no longer useful to him. Calhoun, who we've seen working alongside Larry for a really long time, he tries to go to bat for him as best he can. He says that he falls in line. He always does. Bell is insistent of, I want to see him on the wall. And Reynolds kind of leaves it up in the air of, do you think your father would go for that? And as soon as Bell says he can get him on board, that's all it takes for Reynolds to flip. And it was that easy. Like, for as much power and as high as Larry can climb, all it takes is pissing Bell off, who has a powerful father, and Reynolds just has to be the deciding vote. Calhoun falls in line after that, and Larry's fate is sealed. And he watches it all play out, which was crazy. Because you can see him watch how much he miscalculated. Then we cut to June and Moira, and they are waiting for Janine in the room that she had sent them to. June is anxious and pacing and wondering what is taking Janine so long, and Moira is reminding her that she has a gauntlet of commanders that she's got to get through. And June says she can't believe that Larry's there. And Moira says, oh, did you think he was different than the rest of them? And June says that she did. I guess I can see how in this situation, without all the context, when June has been removed from Gilead and Larry and all of his wheelings and dealings, that she might read this situation as Larry just hanging out at Jezebel's. but I feel like she knows him well enough to know there has to be a different reason why he's there than the obvious one. I mean, she's seen enough of Larry to know that Jezebel's just isn't his place at all. Like, nothing that June has seen from Larry has ever given her the impression that he would enjoy Jezebel's. So I feel like she owed him a little more credit in this situation than just chalking it up to, like, I guess he's just like the rest of them. But I can also see how when you're just popping in on a situation, it would be very jarring to see Larry at Jezebel's. Then Janine bursts in through the door, and you can see that June is just delighted and relieved for this reunion. And it's written all over her face. It's really overwhelming to her to have Janine in her grips, finally. You have this big, loaded reunion with June and Janine, and there's so much there that Moira doesn't know about, but Moira does know her, but it's more of that like friend of a friend situation. So it's like this big happy reunion, and then like, oh my god, Moira, hey, how are you too? And I appreciated the fact that I could see that going down in any other situation the same way. So Janine wants to know why they're there, and June tells her about the plan and how they want to kill all the commanders, and Moira jumps in there and says that they need to warn the girls, and can you trust them? And she goes, yes, and you can too. And she gives them the letters to the girls' families that she grabbed before she came to meet June. And it's a good reminder, because we've come so far and June has come so far from those letters in that Mayday package of season 1, that to see that after all this time, there's no progress in this world where these illicit letters are still the most important thing that Janine can think of to give to June to get out. As much as Serena and Lydia and Larry want to talk about reforms, the reality of the situation is still this. And Moira asks her if she thinks that she can get the girls ready by next week, and she says, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? They've had shivs made just for this occasion. Like, you can just see the glee on her face as she is so excited to finally have a way to fight back. And she gives them all the tactical information of how they're going to get back in with the service elevator and the key code, and she draws them a little map. So she gives them all the necessary information, and then you can see her demeanor change a little bit as she says that she has to go. She can't be gone for that long. And it's a really quick scene, but I feel like since the moment that Janine has entered the room, June's still been getting her feet underneath her. Like, she can't quite process all the things in which she wants to say to Janine in this moment. And before she can even begin to say anything to her, Janine's leaving. And she steps in there and she says, no, 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 no. And you can tell, like, she has not thought this through. Like, she just can't walk away from Janine in this situation again. And so June tells her, you can come with us tonight. And Janine says, really, at the same time that Moira says, June, like, you're veering off script here. What's happening? Dial it back. And Janine says, really, and she's surprised, and this wasn't really something that she was considering. But she immediately says, can you get us all out? And she knows what the plan is here, and she says, don't you need me to help get the girls out? And Moira's in the background going, yes, this is the plan. We just discussed the plan. We know the plan, June. And June's like, no, somebody else can do that. And Janine says, no, they trust me. I'm sorry. And June's starting to plead at this point. She's starting to get desperate. But Janine is really resolute. She says, I can't leave without my girls. And that's one thing that's been so consistent with Janine through this series, is this sense of group and camaraderie and loyalty. It's why she leaves Chicago and ends up getting recaptured, because she can't let June go by herself. And she says, handmaids always walk in twos. Like, she really gets a lot of motivation and a lot of her like day-to-day inspiration and toleration of this world from the group of girls that she's been with, whether it's the handmaids or now these Jezebels. And also we know that June has so much regret for leaving Janine. Like, this is that it weighs so heavily on her conscience that the second she has a chance to come back for her, that's what brings her back into Gilead, because she didn't want to leave her the first time. And they're going to get into that scene later of Moira being like, I know, I was there. To see Janine, who has always been this little sister role, this little like apprentice, like somebody that needed to be looked after and guided and taught, not someone on an equal playing field to June. And to see that what Gilead has turned Janine into at this point in the time that June has been away from her is really going to be interesting. Like, I hope we see more of June. Oh God, what if we don't? it's just been really interesting that June's been able to see these glimpses of sides of Janine that she hasn't been privy to yet. And it's the closest we've come to seeing Janine kind of put her money where her mouth is. In the milk episode, when she was discussing with June about June turning them in because they had Hannah and she was afraid that she was going to get hurt. And Janine is like, Alma and Brianna are dead because of you. And June is trying to defend herself and defend her actions, and she says to Janine, you would do the same thing. And Janine says, you don't know what I would do. And so to see her here stick it out and give up that opportunity to get out just to stay with her friends and make sure that she sees them all out is really interesting for June to see, because this is a move that June would do. And I just don't think she was prepared for Janine to do it. So Janine exits and the music gets really somber, and I had not considered that this might be the last time June and Janine see each other. Oh no. It just reminds me so much of Becca. I feel like when we read the Testaments, Becca reminded me a lot of Janine. And I'm very nervous to see Janine feeling like she's got this similar Becca trajectory and similar Becca purpose. And I'm hoping that they wouldn't do that to Janine for a lot of reasons, but mostly because I imagine that's what we're going to see Becca do. So I don't want to see Janine do it first. And to what end? Not to bring down Gilead. I don't know. I don't like the music that is played as Janine leaves, and I am hoping that it is for the effect of June watching her friend exit and hoping that she sees her again, and not foreshadowing that she will never see her again. But the door is barely shut before Moira turns on June, and she's like, I can't believe you did that. And June plays dumb, like she doesn't know what she's talking about, and Moira's like, you made me the cold-hearted bitch who told her she couldn't come. And then June responds with, I wasn't thinking about you, I was thinking about her. And this fight that they are having right here reminds me so much of when Moira rescued June. And they're going to reference it, and it's just so interesting how the tables have turned in these situations. Like, you had Moira going in and pulling June out, even though she didn't want to be rescued. She didn't want to leave without Janine, and she didn't want to leave without Hannah. And Moira had to convince her to get out. And then once they're on the boat, Moira and June and everyone on the boat have to face the consequences of Moira not thinking about anybody else, only thinking about June and smuggling her onto the boat. And she has that conversation with Una, where Una eventually just breaks up with her by the end of the episode. And she's like, you ruined everything. And she's essentially, and Moira's point was essentially like, I wasn't thinking about all of you. I was thinking about her, and she's going to be dead, and she's my person. So what else did you want me to do? And June is now in Moira's position saying, she could be dead. This is my opportunity to get her out. What else did you want me to do? I feel like Moira is rightfully angry that June kind of threw their plan out the window in a really, really dangerous way, because if they play, it's like Moira said, like their whole plan is gone if they take Janine tonight. And the fact that June was willing to put all that on the line for Janine is very frustrating to Moira, and I think it brings all of the frustrations that we're about to see come to a head. But so she's rightfully frustrated, but her point of, you make me look like the cold-hearted bitch who said no, just wasn't true. Like, Janine, there wasn't ever a point in the conversation, maybe for like a half a second, where Janine thought this was a possibility. Once she realized that if she gets out tonight, she's not there to help get the rest of the girls out, she said no. She said, I can't. She said sorry. And Moira in the background telling June to shut the fuck up was inconsequential to Janine's decisions. While it could have gone that way, and Moira's right to be frustrated, I feel like her saying, you made me look like the cold-hearted bitch, like, Janine wasn't seeing it like that at all. And they keep getting closer to the heart of the matter. When June says, I wasn't thinking about you, I was thinking about her, Moira's response is, exactly. You don't give me a second thought. And June is like really taken aback by this because she was so tunnel visioned on Janine that she wasn't giving Moira a second thought. June's thought process and her actions had nothing to do with Moira. She wasn't considering her at all, and that's Moira's point. And June's like, I'm sorry, what are we talking about? So Moira spells it out for her of, you take Janine tonight and our Mayday plan is screwed. And June just kind of throws it out the window and she's like, I had to leave her in Chicago. And Moira's like, I know, June, I was there. Don't you think this is hard on me too? And June says, well, it doesn't seem like it. And the gloves are starting to come off. And they're starting to finally say the things that they had been holding back for what seems like a long time, especially in Moira's case. And June tells her, I've known her longer. We went through hell together. I watched our friends die, so I'm sorry if I feel responsible for her. I'm sorry if I can't just abandon her here. And everything she's saying, I feel like is exactly what Moira felt for June, especially in the beginning days when she had a lot of guilt for getting out a couple times without June. Well, I don't know if she necessarily felt guilt for getting out without June the second time when she officially did get out, but I know she felt a lot of guilt for leaving June at the subway station when they were trying to escape the Red Center. And Moira got on the subway and she had to make that decision to continue on or to go back with June, who was already caught. And so Moira knows about these tough decisions, and that's why she was so insistent on not leaving June behind again in Canada. And now we're seeing the same thing play out, but this time it's with June and Janine, and the tables are turned. So it's just so interesting to see this June and Moira relationship versus this June and Janine relationship and the ways in which they parallel each other and also kind of mirror each other. And Moira just unloads on her. She goes, your feelings, your guilt, your friends, you. Do you have any idea how fucking sick of you I am? And I just love the way she says that line. God, Samira Wiley is so good. I am going to miss her on this show. I knew she just recently, I saw a quote about how she was saying she won't be bringing Moira back on the Testaments because she wants to move on from playing a traumatized character. And I can completely get and respect that, but she does traumatize so well. She does Moira so well. She gives her so much fire and heart within that trauma. But I can completely understand after 6 seasons of having to get into that mental place that Moira's in order to portray her with the authenticity that she portrays her. Yeah, that would be daunting and exhausting, and I'm sure she's ready to move on. But Samira Wiley is just so good here. The scene with Moira was incredible. But Moira removes any filter and tells June exactly how frustrated she is with her, and June just takes it all in for a second, and then she says, no, I don't. And she says it so quietly. And she does the same thing that I thought Moira did in the last episode that was so cool, where she takes all of this fire and emotion and intensity that is coming at her from June, and she stops her in her tracks by taking down that intensity. Like June, she can see that Moira has been sitting on these things that she's spewing out of her mouth right now for a long time. And June just kind of gives her the space to keep going. And Moira tells her about how she feels like June sucked all the space for trauma out of the room. She goes, do I get to have PTSD? Do I get to have trauma? Because I was raped every night. It made being a handmaid look like heaven. And June just continues to bring the intensity down, and she goes, okay. And you could tell that Moira was expecting more pushback and more defensiveness and more explanation and just more of a fight coming back at her, and instead she got okay, and she was like, okay. And June goes, yeah, you're right, being a Jezebel is way worse than being a handmaid. Yeah, like you got raped a lot, I just got raped a little, kind of like a once a month thing. And she really makes light of the situation, and she knows, and you can tell that she's trying to get Moira to laugh. She's trying to get her to dial it back just a little bit so they can start to actually have a conversation. And just take some of the fire out of her. So, and it works. She starts to laugh, and she says something about and she says, yeah, you're right. You stayed in longer. I got up quicker. And then once she gets her to laugh and brings that tension down a little bit, she tells her with complete sincerity that I'll never know what you went through. I just think that if we start to compare our suffering, then those fuckers have won. And then she continues to make light of the things that Moira said. As she says, God, I didn't realize you hated me so much. And Moira's like, I don't hate you. And she's like, it kind of sounds like you do a little. And Moira responds with, but I love you always. And that's the conversation that those two really needed to have. They've been like dancing around it and butting up against it. And to finally see them kind of rip off the filter, especially Moira, to be able to have that space to tell June how she feels about things, because June came back in a way in which really sucked the air out of the room for Moira to have that space. It was nice that they get that moment, and then the moment is over as quickly as it comes because the Guardian comes in the door. He finds the letters that the Jezebels had written pretty much the second he walks in, and he's like, oh, reading materials, and he locks them in the safe, and he doesn't waste any time. Like, he comes in, he knows exactly the power and control he has in the situation, and finding the illegal letters is just one more reason for him to get these two women to comply with anything that he wants. But this Guardian situation feels very, very real to me. Like, this could absolutely happen because you have all the high commanders and men of importance up in the penthouse with the premium girls, the, what did he call them? The rapist fruit. And then you have these Guardians that are just kind of waiting around this area. Well, the Guardians are patrolling, but then you have like the drivers and all of the entourage that comes with these men at Jezebel's. And they're just waiting around. And that's why I feel like the Marthas would be most at risk, is in these situations with these rooms where at any point, any Guardian or driver or man of any sort could come in and do whatever he wants. They're not going to have any recourse to accuse him of anything. And that's what I kept thinking as this whole fight with the Guardian plays out in this hotel room, is we've seen this before with June at Jezebel's. Like, it feels very, very Winslow-esque, right up to how they disposed of the body in the incinerator. At first I was thinking that like really kind of highlights what I think we're going to see moving forward for the next 5 episodes, as everything kind of comes to a climax with this Mayday plan and the season and the series, is how much all of June's experiences and the experiences of everyone else fighting within Mayday is going to help them strategically in this fight against Gilead. So to see her in a situation that we've already seen her in, at first I'm like, well, she's just improved, you know, we can see that she isn't as shell-shocked by the end of it. When she kills Winslow, the Martha has to come and tell her they know how to handle it, and she asks her if she is okay, and June is just traumatized and out of it in that moment, and she's not out of it at all. By the time she kills this Guardian with Moira says, we can't just leave the body here, and she's like, I know. She's been here before, she knows how to operate accordingly. But it also highlights, I think, what they've said a couple of times in this episode, or at least recently with Larry, is he's just like the rest of them. He's like every other guy. And they have these Marthas with these face coverings to kind of remind us, like, these men can do whatever they want in these situations. And the situation that June and Moira are in is something that these Marthas could find themselves in at any point, and it would be very commonplace for them to be raped while they're at Jezebel's. It's just a very commonplace situation. So it ups the stakes a little bit with wanting to see this Mayday operation work, because with Belle especially, I feel like Jezebel's has just gotten like so skin-crawlingly, intolerably disgusting to watch. And so you want it to come to an end, and you want all these commanders to see a violent death. But with June having to kill a man in Jezebel's while he tries to rape her, it's also a good reminder that this is just the reality of the situation. Like, Belle as a person, like, he exists, he's out there, and given these circumstances, there would be a lot of Belles in this world. The same way this Guardian coming in, like, he knows how to play in the situation. So I think it's a couple things, like this killing of the Guardians at Jezebel's, feeling so much like Winslow does remind us that June knows how to handle herself in these situations, and we've seen growth from the last time that she's been in this place. There's also that layer of just reminding us that at any point, any woman in this society is at risk and at danger. And at the end of the day, June's going to have to find some peace and some acceptance with the fact that she's not going to be able to get Hannah out. Like, this isn't even a conversation that she's having within this Mayday operation. That's not the goal. That's not the plan. And yet she knows her daughter is going to grow up and live in a world in which she's constantly at risk just by existing. Jumping a little farther ahead within the scene, but basically that's how it plays out. It's June and Moira, and they're tag teaming him, and you can tell like they are coming off of this conversation where there's just a lot of history and a lot of love and a lot of years of friendship. And now you're watching the two of them have to work together, and they don't need to communicate with words. But again, that's something they learned as handmaids in Gilead. But on top of that, these are two very, very close friends who know each other really well. And it's going to take the two of them working together to overpower this man in this hotel room. And then June turns to Moira and she says, "We can't leave the body here." Because we know she's been down here before. And Moira assures her, "We won't." Because as much as June has been in this position once before, Moira has also pointed out that she's been in this position for years. Then we cut to Serena. And it's a little creepy as she's walking through this dark library and there's no one there. And she's like, "Hello?" And then Wharton appears and he's unveiling this library that he's built essentially for her, but also for all the boys and girls of New Bethlehem. And she's really touched by this gesture, even him just bringing her here to see it. She says, "This is really beautiful." And he says, "Well, you were the inspiration." And she says, she makes a comment about growing up, about libraries being her favorite place when she was a little kid. And it makes me like, just want to strangle her. As I'm like, how, Serena, how could you possibly get behind a law in which women can't read and write when you are who you are? Like, I can't wrap my head around how she could be convinced that giving up reading and writing would somehow serve God and therefore make her worthy of being fertile. Like, religion. But it's mostly a nice moment as she's sitting in this library. And then he tells her that he wants her help with the verbiage on the sign. And she says, he says, "Will you follow me?" And she says, "Well, I'd be honored." And it's so crushing to me on the rewatch because knowing that he's about to propose to her, which gives me major reservations, knowing that he's about to propose to her, but she doesn't see that coming. And he's asking for her input. And she's honored because he's asking for her brains and for her thoughts. And instead, what he's actually asking for is for her to be his property. And he says it a lot nicer than that, but it like rubs me so much the wrong way when I rewatch the scene now because she just seems so touched. Like, "You want my opinion?" You're like, "Yes, I would love to give you my opinion." And what he really wants is a wife. And when she sees the sign with her name and his name sharing the same last name, she realizes what this is. And she turns around and he says, "I know this feels quick, but this doesn't feel quick to me. I've wanted this, something about like, I've wanted this for a long time and I just had to take this opportunity." And she's really quick to say, "I didn't come back here to be a wife." I feel like I haven't commented enough on the fact that she's refused to wear any blue at all through this season. So her quickly being like, no, this isn't my plan. She really enjoys all these interactions with Wharton, but I don't think it was ever on her mind to get married to him again. Like, she's quick to say no initially to this proposal. And he seems like taken aback, like she forgot she was fertile when she's talking to Lydia, and Lydia's like, "You have a healthy womb. You need to go get married and have babies." Like, obviously. And so I feel like everything about Serena has rejected stepping back into that wife role. But Wharton's proposal is just so Serena perfect, especially considering her conversation with Lydia, where Lydia's like, "Politically, this makes sense. Like, we need his influence. And also, you have a healthy womb and you need more babies." I think Serena relents because it's a perfect proposal. I mean, I was ready for her to say yes until I thought about it 30 more times as I trying to do this episode. And I'm like, oh, this is terrible. Serena, what are you doing? Stop it. But I think what I appreciate is that we talked a lot about it with June and Nick, especially in season like 1, 2, and 3, when she was just so starved for any kind of interaction and human connection. But Serena's craving some intimacy in her life. Like, when was the last time she had any kind of connection with anyone? Like, we see the episode where she's watching Rita have the reunion with her sister, and it's just an interaction that she's never had with Rita, because Rita's never been happy to see her in that same way. Like, is there anyone in Serena's life that's ever happy to see her or like on her side and partnering with her besides Lydia? Like, she's got Lydia and Larry wouldn't even marry her. So like, I get it that Wharton is handed to her on a silver platter, and she does try to say no initially. And I mean, come on, Wharton. He said, I don't mean to speak ill of the dead, but Fred tried to erase the best parts of you, and I want all of you. I mean, come on, that's convincing. And she says, I have a job to do here in New Bethlehem. And he says, yes, of course, I want your good works to continue. Which, it's kind of ominous that he doesn't say job. Like, he dances around the word job, as if he's not used to saying a woman has a job. He's been in Gilead a little too long. And she says, I can't live in DC. And he says, we'll make plans to move to Boston. And he mentions Rose in DC again. I just can't figure out if she's just accompanying him back to DC or if he's accompanying her. I mean, she's married. Wouldn't she stay with her husband? Unless that husband's Nick. Wharton just doesn't trust him. But anyway, so she says that she can't move to DC, and he says, that's okay, well, I'll make arrangements to move to Boston. And she's like, I can't move to Boston. And he's like, well, then we'll split our time between New Bethlehem and Boston. And that's a little ominous too, because if she's not living in New Bethlehem, does she got to put on the blue dress when she goes to Boston? Or do the Gilead rules not apply to New Bethlehem wives? In which case, I guess it's perfectly suited for Serena. I don't know. I feel like him not being at all willing, even in this proposal of extreme magnitude, for him to not say, we'll just live in New Bethlehem and I'll work remotely, or I'll come whip these high commanders over here into shape. He's still like insisting that his work is going to be the priority and his job is the priority. And she can continue her good works on the weekends in New Bethlehem, but she could be a commander's wife in Gilead on the weekdays. Serena, this is icky. But he's got a good answer in Serena's eyes. You can see him like just checking off all of her reservations one by one. He has an answer for everything. And she says, I will never stop writing. And he says, I don't want you to. She goes, I know it sounds grandiose, but I really do believe that I was sent here to change the country. And he says, let's change it together. And I really need the two of them to have a conversation before this wedding about what change looks like for each of them. Like, I want that pre-wedding counseling session. Like, Commander, what does reform look like to you? Because I'm just not convinced that his idea of reform and Serena's idea of reform are going to be well suited for marriage. And she's got that single mom concern of, would you be able to raise another man's child? And while I feel like that's a fair question for her to ask in a marriage proposal while she has a child, this is Gilead, where women are expected to raise other women's children all the time. But for some reason, it's going to be too difficult for these men. But he says that he'd be honored. So again, check. So then he says, don't you think that Noah should have a brother or sister, as many children as we can manage? And she says, yes, I do. And he gets down on one knee, and that's that. Serena's going to be a wife again to this wild card Wharton. The more I break down that marriage proposal, the more I'm like, I just keep going back to that Tuello quote of Gilead, and I feel like it could apply, and I just feel like it could apply to Wharton here, of a surface level beauty papered over a stunning amount of hypocrisy. And I'm just worried that that's what that proposal is. Like, I get that they have Marthas and these wives have a lot of help, but still, I just don't I never got the impression that Serena wants like a whole household full of children. I think one or two, maybe, but his idea of how many we can manage and her idea of what's manageable, again, that's a conversation that needs to happen before this wedding. And 5 episodes left. I hope they can hash out some of these details. I'm afraid that Serena's just getting sucked back into the surface level beauty of Gilead. And it's so easy for her to ignore the stunning amount of hypocrisy. Also, I was thinking about this too. I don't know. I can't figure out an answer between the testaments and what we've seen on the show about wives in older age. Like, when does a household age out of a handmaid? Because theoretically, Serena could be raising children into what? Her 80s, 90s? At what point is a commander and his wife too old to have a handmaid and new babies? Never? Is it up to them? I guess like Wharton's kind of making it sound like the commanders get some kind of family planning choice. I assume Econo people don't. They're going to Jill Duggar it up until their uteruses can't sustain pregnancy anymore. And we know that's what will happen to the handmaid. And Lydia's trying to change their retirement situation. But I don't think it's ever discussed like when a commander stops having a handmaid. It must just be a decision they make. In which case, Serena, have these conversations with this guy before you marry him. Then we cut back to Jezebel's, and Moira and June are disposing of the Guardian's body while Luke is arriving to pick them up at their rendezvous location 2 hours later, and now they're late. So I love the cut of them dumping the Guardian's body onto the ground, and my first thought was like, oh shit, they're gonna have to pick that up. And then it cuts to the Guardian talking to Luke, and he's like, you're here to pick up what? And I'm like, oh my god, that's really funny. They know exactly what's happening in my brain. I really enjoyed that. But Luke is now seeing what happens when the plan goes awry. And he's getting his first taste of having to think on his feet, although that's not true. He's had to think on his feet before. He's gotten captured with June going back into Mayday when they were in the bowling alley with Jaden, and they got captured like right before the border. And so he was interrogated. Like, he's seen some things exactly, but still, this is what June was telling him of like, you can have a plan, but it's never going to go perfectly. And now he's here to pick up June, and he's really hoping that she's going to walk out the door and their plan is going to go perfectly, and he's starting to realize that it's not. So they're trying to get the body into the incinerator, and the Guardian is telling Luke that they have to come back and get their pickups tomorrow because everything's in lockdown and no one can go in or out. And Luke doesn't want to take that as an answer. Like, he's not leaving here without June. So he keeps trying to stall and hoping that June's going to come out. But they're in lockdown. Like, no one's coming out of that door at this point. And then June shows up and she's right there. And I had the impression that she was like so much further away from him at this point. And then she's just so close. They got the Guardian in the incinerator and they get back to this location and she's watching this interaction with Luke and the Guardian. And I really thought for half a second that it was going to work out, that Luke was going to find a way to convince his Guardian to wait one more moment and June was going to be able to slip into this truck. But the Guardian is just sick of Luke talking and he smashes him in the face. And June reacts like she got hit in the corner. And the Guardian's like, get him out of here. And Ellen's like, yep, you got it. And June has to watch their ride drive away. And June's still kind of reeling from having to watch Luke in peril. And I would say that's definitely June's Achilles heel. And I'm worried if we're going to see that come to a head again. Because we've seen she'll really keep her cool until Hannah or Luke is in danger. And then, she was loud in that corner. And it's Moira who has to bring her back into reality and back into the reality of their situation. And she's like, he's going to be okay, but we're fucked. And she brings them to the parking garage that we see in the trailer. And it's so close to being a viable exit, but you need a key card. Then they hear voices, so they hide behind one of the cement pillars. And June can see that it's Larry. And the car starts driving towards them, and Moira goes, oh, fuck. And June's like, no, it's okay. And she waits and hides. And my God, Larry, there's nowhere to go. He needs his key card to get out, but he guns it so fast. Men do this all the time. I have to park in a parking garage at work. And I'm telling you, the way that men, drive out of this parking garage, they gun it. And I'm like, you have nowhere to go. It's ending. Like, there's 3 feet before you have to do a U-turn. Like, what is happening? Why are men like that? So Larry is gunning it out of this parking garage, and it just drives me crazy. And especially because June's gonna jump out in front of his car, and she's standing right in front of the car, and she pulls down her mask, and he goes, oh, hell no. And it's that line from the trailer, and it's just so great. Especially because we saw that he had like a premonition of June while she was there, and he kind of shook it off like, there's no way that's actually June. And then all of a sudden she just jumps out behind this garage while the place is in lockdown. And of course, that's just so June of her to have something going on. He probably doesn't know too much about it, but enough about it. There's a guardian missing. Everyone's in lockdown. No one in, no one out. He's trying to get out. And June pops up. It's like, of course, June is going to have something to do with these alarms. And he gets out of the car and he says, out of my way. And she says, please, I need you to get us out of here. He's like, us? And Moira comes out. She goes, what the hell is happening here? And Moira's like, we've got like 30 seconds to get out of here. And June goes, please, get us out of here, Joseph. And she calls him Joseph. I love that she calls him Joseph. She's done that before. It always feels like she's trying to appeal to him using Eleanor's voice, because we most frequently heard him being referred to as Joseph from Eleanor. And so as soon as she says that, it kind of just feels like she's tugging on his heartstrings a little bit, and he's going to say yes to her. And he does. I mean, come on, it's Larry. Like, as much as she's like, I can't believe, he's at Jezebel's. I thought he was different. It's like, she knows that she has to know that he's not at Jezebel's for the obvious reasons, and it's got to be for some kind of Larry manipulation, motivation, survival, commander technique. And she's got to know that he's going to help her in this situation. Like, he's going to help her. I mean, I had faith that he was going to help her, but I guess that's kind of the point through this episode, is you can never fully put your stock in somebody like Larry, because he's wearing that commander uniform, and the things you have to do to get and stay in position in that uniform are untrustworthy. Larry comes through because he is different than the rest. He is better than most of those idiots. Thank you. But he opens the trunk and tells her to get in. And they climb in. And she says, can you get us across the... And before she can finish the sentence, he slams the trunk in her face, and that's the end of the episode. All right. We'll keep this short because I want to edit this and get this out and then start working on the next episode, because I'm finally out of the hole that the first 3 episode premiere always puts us in. Hopefully, barring any major complications, episode 6 will come out much closer to when the episode comes out. I'd also like to do a separate video of the halfway point of where we are with all these people, but I won't do that if it's going to put me behind in 6. So far, my work schedule has been very gentle with my podcasting schedule, so it's been, I think, if everything stays the same, be a much more reasonable pace, and we'll go from there. But a couple thoughts about the end of this episode. First, I don't think that Larry's going to be able to get June across the border. I'm guessing he's going to drop her off at Nick's. We hadn't seen Nick a lot in this episode, so we'll probably see him in the next episode. I don't know what the fuck he's going to do with June. God, he's going to be so sick of seeing June. I mean, I know Nick is always happy to see June. He's very devoted to June. I don't know if Larry dropping June off to him right now is going to work out. Although Wharton is going away with... Oh, shit. Wharton's going away with Rose. That's why they keep mentioning it. So Nick's going to be home alone. June's going to Nick's. Larry's going to drop June off at Nick's, and he is going to be... Well, if Wharton and Rose aren't around, that'll make his problems a lot less. I was just thinking about this, like, weird thing in the Testaments. I don't know which one it is. Is it... Well, I guess it's got to be Holly, Nicole, Daisy. I don't know what we're calling this child. Daisy, or as we know her now, Nicole, is talking about this book that she reads in school, and it's about some French woman keeping some man in her closet, and Daisy thinks like that would be really fun. I think she thinks that would be like just really great to have this man in her closet. I gotta go back and read that book. That's funny. But that's how I pictured June and Nick, except June be the girl in the closet. Oh God, she'd be in a box again. She's been in closets before. Jeez. But she won't have to be in a closet because Rose and Wharton are in DC for unknown reasons, other than Rose needs to accompany him to DC and Nick's untrustworthy and can't be left alone with his pregnant wife because he can't be left alone with guardians and hospitals. Oh, Nick's in trouble. I think Nick's starting to feel the weight of playing both sides right now, and he's starting to feel the weight of all of those bodies piling up, and the blood on his hands is fresh. So I would say that Nick would be more likely to say fuck the Americans and double down into Gilead right now, except for June showing up. And there's one thing we know: when June shows up, Nick's going to do whatever June needs. So maybe, is June gonna assemble Nick and Larry and Serena, and she can get Lydia on board and get all these people to go against Gilead to take down? Everyone there wants Gilead hurt in some way and reform in some way. So maybe June definitely, this is the Handmaid's Tale and this is June. So that could be June. That could actually be it. This halfway point, we could be moving towards seeing all of these players that have been playing on opposing sides for all these seasons all coming together to fight on the same side because they all know June in some way, and June's going to be the one putting all these pieces in place. Yeah, I think that'd be cool. But I got major reservations for Serena, although maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Wharton is the wild card that's gonna save the day, and Lydia's right that he's the political influence that they need. I mean, we haven't seen anything terribly egregiously terrible with Wharton. He's in a directly comparable position to Fred, and he's colleagues with people like Calhoun and Reynolds and Bell. So I don't know. It's easy for Wharton to look good, and he knows how to make a pitch, but that's not good for marriage. And there's a lot of unknowns about this marriage with Serena, and she hasn't known him long enough. Like, he's been in love with her, it sounds like, for a long time. But she didn't even know who he was, or if she knew who he was, she didn't really care. She wasn't like, can't wait to see Wharton now that I'm single. It all just happened so fast, and I feel like Serena hasn't really thought through all of the implications of becoming a wife again. I mean, obviously she knows, she's done it long enough, but I don't know. I don't love Serena getting married. I still don't love Wharton, and I have no reason other than he's part of the sons of Jacob, so like he can't be great. The best case scenario here is we're dealing with a price. And then we got Janine, and she's as much as a wild card as Wharton in terms of like her fate. I agree with people in the comments who are saying like she's too beloved to kill because like she is, and also in this world, like the reality is too beloved doesn't mean invincible. So the reason that I actually hate Janine dying is not because she's so beloved and good and all the reasons why one is emotionally attached to Janine. I feel like I'm going to say Janine is right at this point. She's just been saved too many times to die at the end. Like, if she dies at the end, it's gonna have to be like in a massive sacrifice. For Angela, I mean, I guess I could see that. She doesn't know that Caleb's dead yet. June's deliberately withheld that information. I wonder if she's ever going to find that out. She hasn't even mentioned Caleb in a while. So I don't think June's just going to bring it up to clear her own conscience, because that would be fucked up. I don't know. But I just feel like Janine has been saved too many times. Like she's gotta have some kind of purpose. So she's either gonna die in some kind of massive sacrifice. Like I don't think she's just gonna get like obliterated by Belle in some kind of fit of rage or anything. Like, oh god, that would suck. He sucks so much. Speaking of Belle, I think it's because he keeps mentioning his father. When I look at him, I see nothing but Don Jr. Like, I assume that they wrote him and casted him to give us Don Jr. vibes, and I never bothered mentioning it because it just seems so obvious to me. But, and like, just so, like, everyone's thinking that, I don't know, it just seems so obvious that I never bothered to mention it. And so I was talking to one of my friends, and she was like, oh my God, Belle gives me such JD Vance vibes. And I was like, oh, I mean, I guess I can see that. He probably looks more like him. I'm really, really face blind. Off the top of my head, without pulling up pictures, I do think that Commander Belle might look more like JD Vance, but I get so many Don Jr. vibes just because he does seem really incompetent, and like the only reason he's there is because his father is so powerful that everyone else in the room has to stay on his good side, because he can get you on the wall if he's mad that you took his plaything. That's how powerful he is, in such an undeserved and nepotism kind of way. And so yeah, he just gives me Don Jr. vibes, but I can see the JD Vance thing too, to my friend. So, all right, I think that is enough for this episode. And hopefully I will do a midway point episode where we just kind of talk about more of where everyone's at and where I think they're going. But that's the biggest ones. Like, worried about Serena. June's gonna fuck shit up. She might never, not never, but she might never see Nicole, Holly in this series again. I think that might be possible. And that means she might not see Holly either, her mother. See, you can't just start calling this kid Holly, because now I'm confused. But yeah, so she might have said goodbye to Holly and Holly already. And she very well, I think she'll see Hannah again. I think she's going to get some kind of interaction with Hannah. She's in Gilead. She's got Serena there. If anyone's going to get June to Hannah, it's probably Serena. Larry? No, Larry wouldn't take June to Serena's. He doesn't. No, that would be stupid. He's not going to take her home because Naomi's there. He's taking her to Nick. Wharton's gone. Yeah, okay. That's done. Settled. But I think that's an episode. I think that's it. I would like to do one more video this week. We shall see. I'm going to prioritize getting 6 out. And after the season, we can do more larger picture stuff. All right. Episode 5. We're halfway through this final season. That flew. But they also threw 3 episodes at us in one night. So I think the pacing in terms of suspense and tension and big major event payoff is all coming down the road. I mean, just this episode with June and Moira and Janine, like, gold. It's just gold, the way their relationships over the course of 6 seasons, for it to all play out so beautifully and so intensely, and with so many different layers and dynamics going on with these 3 characters all in one room together. It's just so well done, and it's so fun to watch. And I just can't wait. I just can't wait to see what else we have. Majorly Lydia. I can't wait for Lydia and June to be in the same room again and what's going to happen. Enough guessing. That is it. Thank you so much for listening. We are halfway through the season. I will see you back here for episode 6 very, very soon. Hopefully right after the episode airs.